Hi, welcome to another installment of our Day in the Life video series with Aspen Publishing. I'm Missy, and I have here today Cardi Worthman from University of Virginia, and she's our student who will be interviewing Mary Levine, who is an associate at Eckert Siemens, specializing in mass tort litigation. So, Cardi, off to you.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, Mary. I was wondering when I've heard that you work in mass tort litigation. I was wondering if that was an area that you started working in when you joined the firm, or if that's been a more recent area of interest.
Yeah, great question. I was hired into the Mass Tort litigation practice group. So I started here about a year and a half ago, and I've always been doing mass tort litigation. More recently, I've done a little bit of coverage work alongside my mass tort litigation boss, but for the most part, I do exclusively mass tort litigation.
What is coverage work?
Coverage work is, at least in my practice at Eckert Siemens, coverage work is working alongside insurance companies where there's an issue with coverage under the policy. So essentially, there might be a claim that's brought against an insurance company for a fire, and they want to know if the policy covers the alleged incident. And so you just have to assess the policy. It's closer to, I would say, like contract work and contract interpretation because you have to read the policy and read sort of like case precedent and see whether or not there's coverage for the claim.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had really enjoyed my insurance law class, so it's great to hear that that's something that's been rewarding for you
Yeah.
after law school. So on the mass tort work, is there a specific area of mass tort that you have specialized in?
Yeah, so mass tort sort of broadly is where there's various or many individual claimants and they all have a similar injury or claim against one or many defendants, but they each retain, it's different from class actions because they each sort of retain their own individual claims. So the facts are different, but essentially it's the same litigation. Um, I specialize within mass tort litigation product liability and more specifically asbestos litigation, which is a pretty niche area of law and varies by jurisdiction. But yeah, there's also talc within this firm, but I do mostly asbestos litigation.
What kind of clients are you working with in asbestos litigation?
Because we're on the defense side, I work primarily with corporations or manufacturers of products, and we do the defense of those products against claims of an asbestos-related injury.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember in like my torts one class, a lot of
Mhm.
it has to do with asbestos because there's such a long history
Yeah.
of litigation there. So that's
And
interesting.
yeah, what's interesting about it too is it will die out at some point, not in
Mm.
its entirety, but because asbestos was banned by OSHA in the 80s, the claims will be, and the latency period for asbestos is about 40 years. The claims will at some point reduce and it'll probably shift more towards talc litigation.
Oh,
And
okay.
so at that point, when the claims sort of start to settle, my practice probably will shift to talc litigation, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, how often are you either taking depositions or in court for this litigation?
Um, so in Massachusetts, asbestos litigation is super niche. We have an entirely separate docket, um, and depositions are very regular. So there are lots of asbestos related claims because a lot of people are working with these products on a day-to-day basis. Um, so we have a deposition schedule where we get regular emails about when a deposition will be noticed. Oftentimes there's several depositions in the same week, and you have to organize with your team to make sure that everyone can cover a deposition. So I'm in depositions pretty regularly. Um, Court, on the other hand, is much rarer, largely because we focus in asbestos litigation so heavily on the discovery phase because we want to assess a plaintiff's claims and see whether or not there was exposure to our product. And so, because of that, we don't often, once we get an assessment of the exposure, while sometimes we take a case through the trial phase, um, we more regularly are focused on discovery, which doesn't have a lot of court involvement.
Mm.
In Rhode Island, I have this like small practice in Rhode Island. There's monthly court hearings and you can present orders. So if there's a dismissal or a summary judgment, you go to court once a month to present those orders for your clients. But that I think is the largest extent of my court work.
And so is the discovery what is the main preparation for those depositions, or are there certain things that you're doing day to day to prepare for that constant pace of depositions?
Yeah, so because there are so many cases and there are so many depositions, you sort of have to focus on one at a time. And cases that are, so an asbestos related illness is ordinarily lung cancer, mesothelioma, or there's another sort of facet of asbestosis, it's called. Um, Cases that are a living plaintiff with mesothelioma are granted sort of exigency. And what this is they're fast tracked. So your focus in the discovery phase and the depositions, you're focused on these living mesothelioma claims. These are the larger claims because it's such a serious illness. Um, and so what I do in preparation for depositions is if a deposition is noticed, I ordinarily will just read all of the case documents. So that includes answers to discovery, the complaint. In Massachusetts, we have something called a disclosure form. And the disclosure form is just the plaintiff saying, these are all the defendants or all the products or manufacturers that I recall working with, and here's where I recall working with them.
Mhm.
It sort of takes the place, it's not takes the place of a complaint, but it's filed in conjunction with a complaint and just gives you more specific information. And you, instead of answering the complaint, will respond to the disclosure form. So I'll read all of the case documents. I'll do independent investigation into the job sites that they're alleging exposure at, particularly where they allege my client may have been exposed or was exposed to asbestos from. And yeah, so I do all of that investigation. And then I prepare a cross-examination in the event that the plaintiff identifies my client during the deposition.
That's so interesting. So when you're talking about doing this investigation, and I heard you talk about your practice in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, are you traveling for work? Are you traveling for these depositions?
Yeah, good question. So prior to COVID, all the depositions would happen in person, of course. Really weren't very many Zoom depositions. So during COVID, obviously the litigation had to change to accommodate sort of the public health emergency. So we started doing depositions over Zoom. Now, I would say every deposition is done hybrid. So you can go
Okay.
in person or you can go over Zoom. We will attend a deposition in person if our client is going to be identified at the deposition and um, we think that in-person communication with the plaintiff would be more successful for our client. We would
Mm.
have a better rapport, for example, with an in-person plaintiff. And so it's more strategy now. Um, I do most of my depositions on Zoom, including cross-examinations on Zoom, but it's sort of a case by case establishing a defense strategy of whether in person would be more beneficial for your client.
Oh, that's so interesting. Where's the furthest you've had to travel for one of these depositions?
I've not traveled for a deposition,
Oh,
so
oh, oh, to
yeah, no, so, but it's okay.
yeah.
My boss recently went to DC, but all of my bosses have regularly traveled because um, they've been involved in this litigation for years. So they've traveled probably to every single state
Oh,
because
wow.
depositions, the plaintiffs live in various states, right? So
Right.
you're gonna hit all the states, and I can imagine it's exhausting traveling so much, but I'm a Zoom girl.
And so how do you resolve these cases in asbestos litigation?
Yeah, so because like civil litigation, these are years long cases. In asbestos litigation, you get a complaint and you won't get a trial date for 3 years, unless, of course, it's a living mesothelioma. So resolution it occurs after the investigation of the claim. So we attend a deposition. If they identify our client, we investigate job sites and whether or not the product that that the plaintiff alleges exposure to contains asbestos because sometimes a plaintiff may have worked with our product, but there's no asbestos containing component within the product. And so in
Hmm.
that case, it's really no exposure to asbestos from our product. So you spend a long time investigating the claims and the exposure allegations and determining to what degree or scope our client might be implicated by the exposure, if any. And so after that, once we have a good sense of what the exposure is for our client specifically, we'll either, if there's no exposure, we'll file a summary judgment motion.
Okay.
And this motion, it's sort of just there's no in all of the discovery responses or in the deposition, there's no identification of our product. So based on the law, summary judgment. But after that, we also, if there is additional exposure, we will um, then discuss with plaintiff counsel and engage in sort of settlement communication. And so very rarely are we going to trial, I would say. We're more engaging in settlement negotiation and discussion, doing pretrial reports, and then, um, yeah, hoping to settle the case.
Interesting. So when I was hearing you talk about how your bosses are doing certain other work, I one of the questions that I was thinking about was how big is your firm, and are you working with different offices in the same firm? How does that work with the asbestos litigation too?
Yeah, so our firm has many practice groups beyond mass tort litigation. I'm in the Boston office, but there's several other offices across the United States. The Boston office, I think, is around 40 to 50 attorneys. Um, the mass tort practice group in Boston, I think, is maybe 10 or 12 of those attorneys. So it's a big practice group in the Boston office. My team in particular there are five of us total. And so there's three partners on the team and two associates. And so I work entirely with that team. I'm interacting, of course, every day with other Mass Tort associates and partners, as well as partners and associates in other practice groups. But I'm pretty much exclusively working with these four people because we all handle the same clients. And so we're
Hmm.
doing the cases together.
And so these are cases all around the country, or these are the cases that are based in the Massachusetts area?
Yeah, so good question. So in asbestos litigation, you might, as a defense attorney for these manufacturers, they have national counsel, they have sometimes regional counsel, and they have local counsel. So when you're national counsel for a client, you handle the litigation across the country.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, regional is you handle the litigation for the region, and then local counsel is you handle just that one jurisdiction. So it would be the
Okay.
state. So for all of our clients, because we have various clients, we may be national or local counsel for them. When it's national counsel, we're handling cases in every single jurisdiction.
Hmm.
So but you do rely on your local counsel for the local rules in Utah, for example. Um, so my cases primarily are in Massachusetts at the local level, but then at the national level, the work I do there is across all jurisdictions.
Oh, that's so interesting. What would you say is like the split between how much you're working as like national counsel versus local counsel?
Yeah, good question. It depends on the day, honestly. Some days I'm doing exclusively national counsel work because a case in a certain jurisdiction might be sort of blowing up and you have to focus on
Hmm.
that case. Whereas sometimes the local work becomes more important because there's a major case that we're dealing with. So it just depends on what's going on in the jurisdiction. I'd give it a 50-50 split overall. Um, but each day is something different. Might be 90-10, just depending, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and then I think kind of just to sum up, what is some of the most interesting parts of this work for you?
Yeah, I love asbestos litigation, particularly because I'm learning a lot about these clients and the products that they manufacture. So prior to this work, I didn't really have a general sense of a lot of these products. And now I work with boiler manufacturers or brake manufacturers. And part of being a good litigator in asbestos litigation is understanding the products that you work with. And so it's been really interesting and fun for me to, I've like watched a million YouTube videos on how to replace a brake in a car. I could probably
Oh,
replace a
wow.
brake, yeah, on my own. But it's important when you're defending the client and doing a cross exam to understand what this person was doing. The plaintiff was replacing a brake. So you need to know what they were doing in order to defend your client. So it's been really interesting to just learn a lot about boilers and valves and gaskets and packing, much beyond what I ever thought I would know. But that I would say is the most interesting.
That's great. And I guess you're getting the second skill of learning how to replace the
Yeah.
brake.
So if you need your
That's
brakes
awesome.
replaced, yeah, let me know.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. This has been really great.
No problem at all. Thank you so much. Your questions were great.